Lucy, in that sequence, we had to have her complete dress recreated in CG and simulated because we're going to have a bunch of snakes right over it. So we first start off by doing some rough roto animation to make sure that our 3D asset of Lucy matches with what's going on with the actor and camera. And then we have our snake animations that can be attached to her body and whatnot. And then we can run a cloth sim and stuff like that to just layer the information. So that's how that works. And yeah, and this is our little team from Copenhagen. So this is on the premiere for Hunger Games. So we've kind of become a lot bigger in recent years. So we have offices pretty much everywhere, and we have a bunch of artists remoting in. But it's a happy little crew. I'm right there on the top left corner. And it was, yeah, this is the team, so they're just saying hi. And this is some of the projects that we've recently worked with, done some creature work on. So Hunger Games is one of the more recent ones, and 65, we got to build some interesting dinosaurs there. And of course, the Star Wars franchise is a big thing for every VFX artist to be a part of. And with Troll, it was really exciting because we got to do more Scandinavian projects because we're a Scandinavian company. So it's really nice when we get to do local things as well, instead of just the big budget productions. So this was the character that we won our Emmy for Star Trek Discovery. And it was for the Su'Kal episode on season 3. It's a really cool character because we got to do some tissue simulation on her, and we got to do a lot of performance capture and facial capture. And we used relatively accessible tools. So for the muscle sim, we used Ziva, and then for the performance capture for the face, we were able to use just the iPhone system. And please don't break again.
Hey Madhav, if you have a second while you're troubleshooting this, you said you built a lot of this character in Zeta, is that right?
In Ziva Dynamics or Ziva VFX.
So for a layman, what exactly do you use that tool for when you're trying to get certain stuff? Like what are you using it for specifically?
So Ziva is a FEM solver, essentially. So it's basically used to create physical simulations, physically accurate simulations for muscles and tissue deformation. And it works primarily through Maya. So it used to be something that was publicly available. Now it's kind of only used by double negative. Houdini has a lot of really nice alternatives for muscle simulation these days. So it becomes a pretty nice tool to also go with. But yeah.
What's the approach though of you said like a lot of muscle simulation and stuff, that creature that you showed us isn't really based in reality, right? So how do you kind of follow that thought process and creativity through?
So, I mean, what we first start off with is, in the case of that particular character, we had an actor in suit on set doing a lot of the performances, so the director could get pretty much everything that they wanted out of the actor on the day. And then all we had to do is basically get the reference data in, create a 3D version of the character, and then sort of do the rotomation animation process we were talking about earlier with the Hunger Games, like when you had to attach like the snakes in. So essentially the CG version of the monster matches the version that's there on plate, and then we could layer in all the physically accurate stuff like all the muscles and things like that, and all the additional kind of effects layers like cloth and things like that that's going to go on top of it. So yeah, and it just creates for like a more believable performance. Along with that, of course, we did a little bit of facial capture as well, because we couldn't get all the facial capture that we wanted from the actor on set, so we just had some of the animators that were in-house do the additional layering of animation, and I can just show you that in a moment. Let's just see. You can go for it while I do some. You mean if you're replacing?
So just one more time, if you could repeat the question that he's asking you for us and for the other people watching in the live stream, that'd be great. You can keep asking your question, but I'm just letting Madhav know if he can repeat it for the stream, that'd be awesome.
So I'm asking, are there actors aware that their performances are being like acted over? They don't have to.
It really depends on the project and what is kind of needed. So very often we don't want to do too much of that, because if the actor's performance is very believable to begin with, you don't want to try to attempt to improve it or like recreate it, because it's too much work and it eats up too much of the funding, right? So it's only in areas where we find that, let's say, either there was a pivot in the project or we need to have a certain effect added in. So for example, if there's anything that's going to go onto the actor's face, then we would have to try to replicate that in some way and attach those elements in, right? So it's mostly on a need basis, so project to project it could change. And the briefing that the actor will get will be really based on what's going on set during production. So we have very little say on that. The only thing that we can kind of ask for is more material if we need to recreate something, let's just say. So that's about that. And yeah, this was a giant space whale that we also made for the same episode, which is also fun. And yeah, for Ghost, this was a big deal because we were such a small production house back in the day. To win an Emmy for Best Visual Effects was yeah, it was fantastic, and working on this character was really cool. We also used the perception neuron suit to capture some of the body performances, which is also interesting. And you can see with this character, we layered a lot of effects with cloth and things like that on top of the deforming character body. And that's just me making expressions on my iPhone and putting that on the character. And this is, yeah, some body performance. Cool. So next up, I have this little case study that I did about 6 to 7 years ago, and this is a little independent project I did. And the goal of this project back then was to see if it was possible for sort of a handful of independent artists to create a fully believable creature performance. So the model was made by a friend of mine, Nicholas, and the animations were done by Fiona and Alok, and we're just working off this like quad-core computer with like a very limited RAM and trying to see if it was possible to get a full tissue sim and groom and render out for character. For me, this project was really important because this was the kind of stuff that got me into kind of VFX and filmmaking, and I wanted to know if, as independent artists, if it was possible to do stuff like this. And we managed to do it. It was very slow, very time-consuming, but we still made it work. And it was a nice learning curve because we could kind of figure out sort of all the mechanics that goes under making a believable character performance. But once we were done with this project, me and Nicholas, we decided to just publish this asset and make it purchasable for people. And we were really surprised because a bunch of animators started taking this on and making really cool animations. So Mahmoud made this one as a really fun one. Yeah, I like that. What's really cool about this is because the industry is like really, the community is really small. It's very collaborative, so you can put your stuff out there and get in touch with really cool artists from all over the world and get them to, yeah, collaborate with you and make some really, really cool stuff. So, yeah, I'm gonna keep that going for a bit. And also in terms of feedback and things like that, the more people that get to stress test things that you build, the better it is for you. So putting stuff out there is always nice. So that was a little bit of animation. And now we can get into the main bit. So the first part of this conversation, like I said, is going to be mostly about muscles and creature effects. So I'm going to talk about two different approaches to doing this. So the first one is the solver-based approach with tetrahedralized geometries. So that's what Ziva VFX used to use, and that's what Houdini uses now. Houdini has some alternative solutions as well, but the benefits of these systems are that you can make more physically believable performances because they're actually going to use complicated mathematic solvers to make the stuff work. And the surface-based deformers, they're basically things that you're going to layer on top of your rigs in Maya or in Houdini. And what's great about that is they don't take as much time to solve. There's not a lot of caching that's involved, so it's a lot faster to work with. It might take a bit more time to produce, but once you have it, essentially you don't need a dedicated CFX artist to go in there and push things around. You can just, let's say, have the animator swap your rig with the muscle rig, and they can kind of pass that stuff through. So this is something that I built with Adonis a while ago, and it works sort of in viewport in kind of real time. And yeah, so it doesn't require you to have a very complicated solver. It's a bit more straightforward to work with. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some custom HDAs that I've used in the past, and Delta Mush, which makes for some really nice skin sliding effects. And some of these tools can be used to layer information. So in my experience with creature effects, the thing that makes often the performance believable is layering multiple effects layers and then kind of building up from there. So the more sort of exposed the characters, the more hard it is to make it believable. So if you layer stuff, it's fantastic. So this is a really cool wrinkle HDA that Mengia made. She's a super talented artist, CFX artist. And it creates basically procedural wrinkles for you in Houdini. And that's super nice because there are some times in production you don't want to actually go through a full cloth solve. So if you can have an HDA that's going to create some wrinkles for you, then it gets the job done a lot quicker. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about machine learning and Ziva RT and stuff that's Unreal and Houdini for machine learning. Because with machine learning, essentially, you can get the benefits from some of these solver-based approach, but you can get the speed that you get from, let's say, the second surface deformer-based approach, which is going to be like more real time. So that's that. So I got this guy. His name is Kobun. So he's a character from 3D Scan Store, and I got him kind of animated with some layers of CFX on top of it. Yeah, so he's got good volume deformation, some wrinkles. He's a fun character. And there's a lot of nice secondary animation that goes with it. And the cool thing about a project like this is it's just me doing the entire work, because the tech is so good that we can leverage a lot of things. And so as independent artists, if you don't have access to like a lot of super talented people, but you don't have that problem, but I have that problem sometimes. For personal projects, then it's good that you can actually leverage some of these resources and do it yourself. And as an independent artist, I can do all the steps needed for this character and deliver a fun performance. And that's good. So here I have a version of Kobun on the left side with just some skinning and some nice deformations, which is kind of okay. It gets you fairly decent results. And then on the right side we have the full muscle sim that's running in. And Of course, the muscle sim is going to take you a bit longer to kind of solve, but what you get is you get better volume preservation and basically a more believable performance. And all of the secondary animation helps kind of settle the character in. It's the same thing what I've been talking about before. Layering stuff is really important. And so on the actual physical sim that's there on the right, we have a muscle layer, we have a fat sim, we have skin wrinkling that goes on top. I've kind of simulated his belt as well, and all of that just helps settle the character in. So we got that. And if you guys have never done this kind of work before, this is basically kind of the steps that's involved. So you have the character rig that's built in Maya that's going to deform your bone as accurately as possible. So, and some of these principles go back all the way to modeling and stuff like that. You really want to have good, accurate anatomy working underneath it. And then when it comes to rigging, you want that anatomy to be deforming the right way, moving the right way. And then you can basically attach your muscles to that bone structure and start constraining it, giving it muscle properties, enable its excitation, the flexing as it articulates itself, both based on kind of pose and also the velocity of movement and things like that. And then you can run it through a final skin solve where it's going to get the benefits of like skin sliding and wrinkling and things like that, and then kind of encompasses your character's performance. So it's quite a bit of work to kind of get there, but once you get there, you get really believable results. And you get Coben, which is great.
I have another question.
Sure.
So, in terms of anatomy, were you using like a model that already had muscle, or you went in and did each muscle?
So for Coben, I had something already, so I could just repurpose that. But there have been other assets, like the dinosaur that was showcased in the beginning of the reel. So we built that, I think 6, 7 years ago, something like that, and we were just starting off, so we didn't have a library to go with, so we actually built it by hand. And it was a really interesting experience because I was the TD involved in building the asset, and then I had the modeling artist who was actually creating the design of the dinosaur and delivering that. So we had to kind of work together to make sure the anatomy feels right, both for the artistic side, but also on the technical side. And that can be a really good experience as well. So on that project, the animator, the modeler, and the rigger were like all working closely together to deliver the thing, which you don't often get in production because everything can be quite segregated. So sometimes you build it yourself, sometimes it's already built for you, and you can go through. And so I have a version with Ziva on the right and with Houdini muscle on the left. And both the setups kind of took maybe a total of like 2 to 3 days to make. So it's relatively quick. But what I like about this is that, of course, Ziva is something that's not publicly available anymore. So some of the studios still have it, but if you want to get a new license, it's kind of hard. But the stuff that's built in Houdini is pretty fantastic. So you can get equally believable performances with both of them. And at Ghost, we are mostly Houdini oriented for all the CFX work, so we're definitely investing in that. And yeah, you can get some pretty believable results in both applications. And I'll do a little demo in Houdini in a little bit to showcase how beautiful that procedural workflow is and how automated it can be. But we got Copen here in 2 different universes, which is nice. Cool. And then, of course, the biggest challenge, which is leading to the question you just asked, is the anatomy workflow and how do you transfer stuff from one character to the next. And it's a big thing because in production houses, you want to kind of have a library of characters so you can repurpose things every time. So if you spend a lot of time building, let's say, a bipedal human being or a quadrupedal dog, you kind of want to be able to transfer all of the stuff, including the anatomy, including the rigging, even the weights. So you need to have kind of tools that allow you to do that. You also need to be able to quickly template things and kind of move it forward. So some of these videos are from my Gnomon workshop for Ziva VFX, where I actually go through the entire process of actually doing the anatomy transfer in Ziva. So if you guys are more interested in that, you can definitely check out the workshop, and I'll showcase kind of how to go through that. But I have like a quick demo, both in Maya and Houdini, to show some of the benefits that each of them have in terms of transferring setups. So let's look at Mr. Ink. Right. So I have Mr. Ink here, and he has a full muscle setup right here. So if I do hit play, and let's say, where's the playback speed? Yeah, okay. So he should start solving now. Okay, so that's working. So now the challenge is, how do we get it into a different character? So I have some plane shapeable geometry here to transfer the setup if I need to. So what I can do is, with Ziva, I have an ability to save the setup. So maybe I'll just put it on the desktop for now. Call it my muscle setup. It'll take a moment. Yeah. And it should give me some feedback of all the things it's done. Great. And then I can basically get rid of the solver, so all of that is gone. And what I can do now is I can try to transfer this character over. So I'm just going to get rid of any existing inputs that it has. Perfect. We hide the rig, and I have these two assets, which are blend shapeable. Cool. So what I can do now is isolate the bone and the muscle, go from my front character to my two character, select all the assets, and let's do a harmonic warp. And then let's give it some more text to work with. So what the system is kind of doing is it's kind of built a lot of text geometry for the muscles and bones, and it's looking at the volume difference between the two kind of target geometries that I've given it. And hopefully, yeah, it should just transfer our character into our Koban mesh. And then once that's done, I can kind of get rid of the history again. So I've got a clean mesh now. And then I can load my setup that I saved out. Cool. And all those settings are back, and it should start to solve again and do all the deformation. So it just doesn't have any animation right now. And so stuff like that is super useful for production because when we want to get like a new biped character started very quickly and we don't have time to actually build all the muscles, let's say from scratch, then this is a thing that's going to help us like jump a few steps and kind of get it going. So you have this in multiple levels, modeling, rigging, CFX. It helps you get things going a lot quicker. And I think I have another file. With the Coben kind of having animation. Let me just, yeah, so he's moving now, and you should see him deforming. And you can also see, of course, all the muscles getting activated. So yeah, so you can pretty much very quickly transfer setups from one character to the next and sort of start building a library. And this is something you can also do as independent artists. So sort of building sort of a resource library for yourself is super useful because in the long run, when you get into production, you might end up joining a studio that doesn't have all the things that you might have at maybe a bigger house, so you need to kind of pull your own things in to kind of get production going quickly. So all of this stuff really helps. And let's open up Houdini to see some of the stuff that they have as well. Houdini also has some tools that can help you do this transfer process, but what I really like about Houdini's system is its procedural workflow. So the whole part where in sort of Maya with Ziva, we had to kind of export a setup out and then bring it back into a scene. You don't kind of need to do that in Houdini. You can just like swap a node and then you kind of get the benefit of everything as long as you build the system very procedurally. And I'm going to show you a setup that one of my colleagues, Andres, built. It's quite clean, very easy to understand, and very procedural. Sure.
So, you say you're like an expert at human anatomy, like you have this, obviously you use reference, but do you like know everything about human anatomy? I guess like if you had to like do it like blank.
I think the fun thing about working with creatures is you have to kind of do the research every time. So there's some collected research you can take over, like let's say the human body is something that's well studied, so and you kind of recreating it every time. So you can transfer that over from project to project, so there's stuff that's learned. And then there's stuff that's sort of saved out, right? So I'm not an absolute expert. I know maybe more than the more novice folks around, but I'm not like a master at anatomy. I'm kind of learning every time. And then, because there's so many different types of characters that come your way. So when we do Hunger Games, we had a lot of snakes, right? So now you're spending a bunch of time R&Ding how snakes move. How does that work with when an animator moves a controller? Like, how does their thinking process works? Because theirs is a very creative field. So how do we build the tools around it so it's kind of it's something that's usable for them to get the result, because it's a very complicated character. So each time you're kind of learning, and then the hope is, of course, that you can assetize some of these things, build it into a library. So if we figure out how to do a snake on one film, we can actually take it to the next one and use some of that knowledge and of course go on. And that's a cool thing about this world as well, because there's so much to learn, and there's something that happens with the compounding knowledge. So year after year, you're just learning new and new things, and then that really benefits you. So that's why when you talk to artists that are 10, 20, 30 years more experienced, they just know a lot more because they've had that wealth of experience, a wealth of knowledge kind of built up over time. So that's kind of how it is. But it always helps to know things and do the research. As from a rigging standpoint, the most frustrating thing can be if you get a model that hasn't been well thought out the anatomy doesn't make any sense and it comes your way, and you have to make something that is usable for the animator, but then if you don't call out on things that are actually wrong and incorrect, the animator will have a hard time using it, right? And it can be simple things like the length and the weight of the tail of a creature. Does it make sense to the position of the head of the creature? You know, is the balance gonna make sense? You know, all of that kind of, you have to think about all of that stuff, and you can't just conceptualize random things and it's not gonna fit together. So the more research you do, the more well off you are, but we make plenty of mistakes. So sometimes there's not enough production time, and of course things go wrong. So I have Houdini here, and we have our fellow who's been cashed out, moving at the bottom, and at the top we basically have some muscle geometries that I'm bringing in. Where's my muscle? I hate these tech tests. God damn it. Okay, let's see. There you go. So I've got Kobun's muscle here, and I've got Kobun's bone. And the bone has some animation. And for the sake of this exercise, I kept it as cached animation that I have. But you could also do procedural animation transfer with joints and things like that. But this would just keep it one-to-one with what we're doing with Maya, with Ziva. So we have those two inputs going in. And essentially, if we go further down in our muscle flex stage, we have basically deformation that's coming in. So how that's working is that we have our muscle geometry, of course, and we are building a system underneath it where we have sort of the muscle fibers set, sort of the groom angle for the muscle geometry. So that's kind of, let's put it as 0.01. Yeah, so just trying to figure out like how the muscle needs to kind of form, the shape of the fibers. That's going to dictate sort of how the thing expands and contracts. We provided some properties, some information for it to understand what other material settings the muscle needs, because each muscle is going to be different. Some things are going to be a bit more stiff. Some of the abdominal muscles are a bit longer, so might need looser settings. And then we essentially generate a bunch of curves. So these 2D line curves that can get bound to ends of the bone. And the curves can basically help us tell when a muscle is contracting versus expanding. And it can also be used to basically calculate velocity of movement, because when an object moves really, really fast, or a character moves really, really fast, all the muscles need to tighten up, so it's a bit more stiff. And of course, because of Houdini's kind of procedural workflow, I can kind of bring in the muscles and kind of automate the build process, and then use those curves to drive our flex, which is kind of happening over here. But this bit of the discussion is more about how easy is it to transfer things over. So I'll just keep the maybe muscle flex node live, and I have a different geometry here, which is the Mr. Ink geometry, and I'm just going to swap that out. And so it's going to go through that chain and just put all the settings in, convert all the nodes, and do all of that. So you get the new Mr. Ink muscle in there, but you have the bone from the old character. So we're just going to update that as well. Cool. And then if we go down, what is breaking in my scene? There we go. And one more thing we can do is, because we have now the new muscle geometry that's coming in here, that should automatically create the new curves for me based off the new character design. And because everything is kind of named and built the same way, it should just, come on, update Houdini. This is such a classic thing to happen. Love it. Come on. Reset. Nice. All right, I need to come back to this one because I am not sure what is going on. It's very strange. But I'm going to have to demo this a little bit later once I figured it out. But I promise I will get back to this. Okay. And then I can just talk about this character a little bit more. Please don't break. Come on. There you go. All right, so we'll come back to the Houdini thing in a bit, but this was the Allosaurus that we built about, I think like 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And this was the character that I said that we had to build all the bone and muscle structure manually. And back then, it took us about, I think it was about 500, 600 frames, the entire sequence that we were doing for this character. And it took us about a day to simulate the whole thing, or a day and a half. And now, to build a character like this, it's considerably faster, especially with some of the power that Houdini offers. You can do this in, yeah, you could solve a lot of these things in half the time, or a fraction of the time, a quarter of the time. But doing the multiple layers of CFX with muscles and fat and skin like that, what you get is a very soft, accurately deforming character. So it takes a bit of time in production to actually make something like this, because it involves a lot more different departments and steps to kind of come in to make a character like this. But what you get is something that's believable. And for me, now that I've kind of invested a lot of time in understanding these things, when I watch films, I can kind of see where studios might have cheaped out because there's not enough time to do something like this. And it's always disappointing because I just know how far you can take something. And at Ghost, we always try to push it as much as possible and make as believable a character as we can. So yeah, muscle stuff is always exciting for me. So you got that. And this is kind of the rough pipeline. This is a little image from Ziva's documentation, sort of like how things work. So often from the animation step, we would output either animation curves or bone cache geometry. And then we would kind of constrain that to our muscles. So in our muscle rig, kind of what you saw in for Coben in Maya. And then those muscles would be cached out and then kind of constrained to a fat simulation, and the fat would go internal into the skin simulation, and the skin would just get sort of layered on top of the geometry that's being cached out from animation. And the reason we do that is because as soon as the animation is done, we want to get it to rendering and we want to get things out, while CFX has a bit of time to kind of update things and get it to be as pretty as possible when it comes to deformations. So that's kind of the rough layout with how you work with muscles. And then I want to talk a little bit about Adonis for Maya. So Adonis is this tool released by InVivo. And what they do is they also basically create a lot of muscle solvers, but they make it sort of more of a deformer-based approach. So you can build the system directly into your character rigs. And what's great about that is we don't have that awkward situation that just happened with Houdini a while ago, whereas you have this kind of build system that's going to go directly into a rig in your viewport, and you can run it pretty close to real time. So you don't necessarily have to have a dedicated CFX artist involved in getting the muscles to kind of get through a shot production. Like, you just build the rig, it's going to be quite stable, quite scalable, and you can just have the animators swap the deformation rig that they're using for production with the muscle rig that they have now with Adonis, and it makes for really fast performances. They're really cool tools for skin wrinkling and skin sliding, which I really love, because those are things that kind of layer information on top of your character. So even if you have, let's say, not the bandwidth to do a full physical, muscle simulation, you can add some of these deformers to fake some of the effects and get a much more believable character, and very often a much more stable system. So they kind of used my bear, and I think they're going to showcase how you can get some wrinkling on it. And Adonis has some nice tools for facial performance as well, because they have the system that can do a nice skin solve and can kind of register what shapes on the face is being activated, and use that as a mechanism to understand what muscles on the face are being constrained to create some secondary dynamics. But this will basically help you create wrinkles in kind of real time. And it's paintable, which is fun. It's a little bit more of an artistic approach, and that's really nice. And for me, with these like different tools, it's just like production to production, production house to house, like what people want to use is always going to be different, but you have a lot of tools available today. So when I go back to that bear cut case study that I did 6 years ago or something like that, like we were kind of limited with what we had, and it took a lot of time to actually produce something, and now you've just got so many options. We're pretty spoiled. And this is another demo from Adonis, and so this performance was done using the Dell Aurora cards, and what's really cool was the stats that they gave me. So the muscle simulation was done at 26 frames per second on viewport, which is really great, super duper fast. And then the entire sort of skin solve, all of that together, it came up to about 2 frames per second, but it still meant that you could run something in your viewport and didn't have to have any kind of CFX artist involved. Another really cool thing about this type of simulation or muscle solve is that one of the cool things Adonis has done is they have this ability to jump to a different part in a sequence and just simulate that bit. So with Houdini and Ziva, what we had to do is you have to kind of go from that initial start pose and go to an entire sim and get to the final result. But let's say in an 800 frame sequence, you're really interested in something that's going wrong on the 500th frame. You don't want to like necessarily sim 500 frames every time to get to that problematic spot. And they have some really good tooling where you can actually just jump to that 500 spot. It's gonna kind of cache the frames around it, sort of the clipping frames on either side, and then you can start working from there. And that is something that's new and custom to them, I think, for now. And I think that's a really cool, cool tool to have. Because some of these long sequences, when they break, it's really painful. And it's nice to know you can jump somewhere in the middle. And yeah, strange muscle man moving. Fantastic. So there's Adonis as well. And we can just take a look at the wrinkle HDA again from Menge. And this is Houdini-based tool. And we've used it on some interesting projects. It's super nice. Like, it's entirely deformation-based, so you can tweak some settings, paint some maps for where you want the wrinkles to be, and you can get some pretty believable results. I think we used it once on a project with an astronaut, and in basically zero space, zero gravity, like, you don't need to have any cloth simulation because the cloth wouldn't move. So something like this is super useful in that case because it's just going to give you all the kind of realistic wrinkling for the clothing without having to actually do a full physics solve. So this is from Menge. She's a really cool artist. Reach out to her. She's got some nice work. So, yep. Next thing we can talk about a little bit is with rigging for CFX. So, like, because we build all the anatomy accurately with the muscles and skin and stuff like that, we also kind of want to make sure that the bone structure that's deforming below is realistic. And I kind of go through some of the stuff on my Gnomon workshop. One of the tricky things with this is that often riggers will build stuff to make sure the silhouette of the creature on the outside looks believable because that's what the animators are working with. They don't want to just move the bones around. So when you build something that's realistically deforming like the bone structure underneath it, you know, whether it's the sliding scapula or like sort of how the rib cage, you know, kind of deforms, you need to make sure that it matches with everything that's going on the outer silhouette as well. So whatever the animator is kind of creating in this scene, that the internal anatomy isn't creating something different. And yeah, when it comes to building a really believable character performance, you kind of want to be as accurate from the ground up. So if that means getting good anatomy when you are modeling the asset, making sure that is the anatomy reference you're using when you're building the rig, and making sure that when we go into CFX and muscle simulation, things like that, we're still being consistent with that. That's amazing. And trying to kind of start early with that to kind of point out mistakes is also really good because you might actually build something and get all the way to either the CFX bit or the animation bit and you realize that you actually, you know, mix something up or you got something wrong. It's really good to get that feedback back to the modeling team and kind of develop again. So having, you know, really good anatomy and deformation underneath it is super important. It also is really good for problem solving because the more things you can chalk off as being, yes, this is correct, then we can kind of figure out if the problem is with posing or some of the things that are happening in scene and not with the asset itself because we've got kind of things done right. So yeah, having a nice believable rig is also important. I have some Maya scenes for this character, so if you want to look at it later, if you have any questions, we can go through that. But some of these clips are from my Gnomon workshop where I kind of talk about doing some of the rigging for CFX. So that also becomes an important thing. So yeah. And then we have a bit on machine learning. So here I have essentially a bind character on the left that works in Maya's viewport. On the right side, I have the Ziva full simulation, and in the middle, I have a machine learned rig, where what the system essentially does is it compares the differences between the bind rig and the simulation deformation, and it kind of bakes in all of that difference into the joint. So what's really great about that is the machine learned rig is working real time. So when we want to do, let's say, a full CFX character, we can essentially run the deformation system through a full muscle simulation, feed that data back into the machine learned rig, and the animator can essentially use the machine learned rig instead. So they know whatever they're posing with the machine learned rig is the same thing that they're going to see after the CFX system. And so that's that. And in a moment, I'm going to show you some viewport deformation. And so when you manipulate the character around, you get all the benefits of having essentially a realistic muscle system underneath it. And if you had to do this traditionally, you'd be using a lot of corrective joints, a lot of blend shapes, and it's very time consuming. And every time you build a character, you need to kind of do it from scratch. But with the machine learning approach, what you can do is you can actually build the character once at the initial stage with some of these like wrapping tools. So let's say we have a new bipedal character that comes our way. We use that system, the Ziva wrapping system or Houdini system, to essentially kind of morph our bipedal character into a new character, run a version of the simulation, feed this through our machine learning system, and then it can give basically really good feedback into our rig in real time. So you don't have to kind of spend too much time doing blend shapes and joint corrections and things like that. And it's also really great for games. And I did a similar exercise for cloth as well. So we have our kind of poorly deforming cloth on the left side, and then we have the full simulation going on the right, and we have the machine learned rig that's in the middle. Of course, the machine learned system is not going to get some of the physics elements right, so it doesn't have any gravity solver or anything like that, but it can do just enough to make the character seem believable. So once you sort of acetize this and have a library of these like baked deformations, you can transfer that to a lot of characters, and then your second tier characters in production can kind of get up-resed and have better performance without having to do full simulation, and that is very useful. I have a demo in a moment for the clothing as well in sort of viewport. So that kind of stuff for me is really nice, and it's really cool for the animators as well. And as things are kind of getting more into game engines, in film as well, for like virtual production and things like that, having these kind of solvers give you realistic deformations is super useful. It's just going to increase the quality of your production much early on. So yeah. That's a little bit with machine learning. And so most of this stuff is done with Ziva RT, but Houdini has a really good machine learning system as well, where you can train similar things, and Unreal has its machine learning solver. I haven't used the Unreal one just yet, but there's a few different applications that allow for this. And for me, with machine learning, this is kind of going to be the big thing in the industry going forward, so that's something actually worthwhile investing in. Nuke has also a really cool machine learning system where you can train certain behaviors to it, so that's definitely something for everyone to look out for in the future. And then we have this project, which is by Carrie Wang. So she's a very talented animator who worked, I think, on The Lion King and some other films. And she reached out to me and Nicholas a while ago because she had this really cool lion animation, and she wanted to kind of see if you can do any muscle work on it to get some nice deformation. So me and Nicholas made the model for the lion, and then I did the rigging and the muscle work for it. And we kind of put it all together, and we got this really cool project. And what I like about this kind of stuff is it's an independent project. It's collaboration with artists all over the world. And so with a lot of the younger artists that come to Ghost, I always advise them to do the same thing, which is to actually do more independent stuff, like reach out, collaborate with people. Everyone has like really cool ideas. And yeah, you can kind of leverage more knowledge by kind of doing that. And yeah, having stuff on ArtStation and Instagram makes it easier for people to kind of spot you and yeah, reach out and make cool stuff like this. Because as a more technical artist, the the challenge I always have in terms of independent projects is making sure I have access to really good 3D models and really good animators, because I'm not good at either of those things. So being able to kind of, have some kind of presence where people can reach out and come up to me with like cool ideas and say, hey, do you want to do the simulation for this? I'm like, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's see what we can make. And this was kind of a really fun project for me. And then we can talk a little bit about my personal development. So maybe like 9-10 years ago, the way we were kind of approaching muscles was with Maya and Clot. So we used to use a Clot solver essentially to do all the muscle effects, which was very inaccurate and painfully slow. You can still do it today, and we sometimes do it just to cheat. But that was kind of where we started. And then the last 6-7 years, I've been kind of investing a lot of time in Ziva and Ziva RT for the machine learning bit, and that's been very promising. But of course, that's not publicly available anymore, and the new stuff in town is Houdini and Adonis. And Houdini, of course, has a more believable physics solver, so that's still very powerful and very usable in production, excluding today's demo. And then with Adonis, the great thing is it gives you, it's a tool that's working inside of Maya. So if your creature team is more familiar there or want to leverage its kind of real-time, fast performance, then Adonis becomes a really fantastic tool to use. And yeah, the reason I'm saying a place for everything is mostly because I'm of the belief that it's not, you don't just go with one tool and kind of stick with that and say that's the only way to do anything ever. I really like to branch out, try a bunch of different things, see what each application has to offer, because based on the production house that you're joining, based on the project, the demands might be very different. So we can't do maybe necessarily a full physics solve for every project, but we want to make our creatures look believable and appealing. So we might have to leverage other tools that's going to get us there much more quicker. So we have to be a bit more flexible with that. A little bit of that. And then we have our exomorph. So this is another independent project that I did with Niazi and 3D Scan Store. And what we did is we used MetaHuman Animator to get the motion capture. I built a nice rig system that I can transfer the motion capture onto with some additional skin solvers, and I just wrapped Niazi's beautiful character to that. And for me, with facial performances, it's just like, it's great that we can create something like this as independent artists today. You see movies like Avatar and whatnot, and you kind of want to get to that same level, and you have the ability now to try it. You might not have the scalability, but you can actually get pretty far with the tool sets publicly available. And yeah, so you can make something like this as an independent artist, and it's not really that hard. And I'll show you a demo with it real soon. But it was a really cool project to be a part of. I think it was part of the ZBrush Reel as well this year. That was really nice. And we'll get to the second part of the talk today, which is going to be FACS and performance capture. So if you don't know what FACS is, it's basically a coding system that they have for facial performances. So it kind of breaks apart all the sub-expressions that exist for a realistic, believable character performance. And applications like MetaHuman Animator and iPhone's ARKit essentially uses these principles to basically drive their system. And it's a really interesting way to do performance capture. As you can see with this example, what the really interesting thing is the fact that if you go for a facts-based approach, you can transfer performances between different types of characters very easily, because as long as they check off the same kind of key expressions, you can basically swap performances from one character to the next. The other example, of course, where I took the female human to the alien, to a primate, to a lion, and it's not perfect. You have to do quite a bit of cleanup to make it feel more accurate, but you can get really far with just transferring some of that data. So that's sort of the facts-based approach for performance capture. Then there's also surface capture, if you've ever seen stuff from Wrap 4D. So Wrap 4D is a tool that's made by Faceform, and they use sort of these really powerful camera systems that will basically do a 4D scan, which is basically 3D scans that are being done over a period of time to get very highly accurate results. We'll see some demos for that one. But that's another way to do performance capture, but that's very expensive, it's very time consuming. The results definitely show, and we'll see in a minute. But yeah, it's going to be an expensive endeavor, so it's only for projects that really demand it that you kind of jump on that. And then we go to some of the other deformers that's available with Adonis and Houdini as well to kind of layer things. So even with facial performances, you kind of want to do skin salts and wrinkling and things like that on top of your main deforming character, just to kind of make things settle in, make things believable. And so we'll kind of go to some of that. So first up, I have this little exercise I did, and it was about, I think, 50 and odd blend shapes to build this face rig, so it's very simple. I got most of the blend shapes out of this fax package that 3D Scan Store had, and I captured the animation with my iPhone and just retargeted it. And you can see with just something as little as that, like how much life can come to your characters. So when you build your, I saw like, I was just watching the student reel from 24, and yeah, a lot of you are doing character portraits and things like that, and adding some kind of animation like this, some kind of layered effect can actually bring things to life. Very often in production, like turntables now are too boring because our clients wants to see exciting new things. So having small things like this can kind of really sort of elevate the spirit and kind of get you on board on a project much more quickly. And the stuff I love about this is that, yeah, it's like 50 shapes, still feels very realistic, and the mocap was just done with an iPhone, so nothing really inaccessible. If you don't have one, you can just ask a friend and borrow something. And there's similar systems that's, I think, available outside of the iPhone as well. And of course, Human Animator, it captures much better stuff, but yeah, you can do a lot with very little. I have another one right here where we did this character. So this is a character from 3D Scan Store, and they have a full fax package that goes with this character. So what we could do was we could just kind of go in there, extract all the shapes that are coming in, and then pipe those shapes back into our rig. And this is from like 7 years ago, something like that, and you could get really believable performance just from that. Especially stuff around the eyes, it's always tricky. So we have that. And then of course we have the big one, which is Human Animator. It's kind of limited to Unreal, but the quality of the performance capture is fantastic. So if you don't have access to really good performance capture tools, and you want to do something like this, that is the kind of thing to invest in. A lot of studios are going to be investing in it. And with the Exomorph project, you can see you can get very pretty results with just having kind of a phone recording and then processing it through their system. And because they have basically a rigging system that they bake the animation data onto, you can also transfer it onto custom rigs, which is kind of what I did in the case of this character, because I needed to leverage some of the tooling that I had in Maya to create better deformations on the face and layer some information before I take it out into a rendering application. And yeah, so you have the MetaHuman control board right here, and what I've done essentially is just constrained my own rig system, which we'll look at in a little bit, and kind of transfer the animation onto that. And you can also see with sort of this checkerboard structure that you don't need a lot in terms of polygonal deformation. Like there's not a lot of wrinkling that's showing up. It's pretty simple, but when you see the performance, it's very believable, very appealing. So even if you don't have the most complex like hardware to go off of, you can get pretty fantastic results. And I think investing time in stuff like this, when you want to showcase the kind of character work you've done, is really, really nice, because there's something to like looking at a character moving that makes it more appealing and kind of draws you in. So it's definitely worth kind of playing with. And it's free with Unreal, so don't need to pay for anything there. And then you have Wrap 4D, which I love, but this is the very expensive capture system. But you can see that the quality of the performance that you're going to get from it is insane, because they're essentially doing multiple 3D captures over a period of time and kind of baking a mesh to that capture. And Faceform is coming out with new tools all the time to help improve the speed and quality of it. But what they make is pretty fantastic. And I believe some of these files are available to download from their system. So if you want to just try it out, I think you can actually get a hold of these scans, and you can play around with it. But yeah, it's just going to get you so much more. By the way, it's a standard requirement to make all of these expressions when you do performance tests. And of course, the nice thing with Wrap 4D is you get all of those wrinkles and things like that, and it looks really pretty and accurate. But using some of these other tools that we saw today, that you could actually layer some of these MetaHuman performances or ARKit performances and still get pretty believable results. It just takes a bit more time and a bit more planning. But of course, Wrap 4D is going to give you the most accurate results, let's say. Cool. And then we have Adonis here again. And they have a really cool tissue solving system. And how it kind of works is you can build a blend shape based face rig, and you can feed in the blend shape data into their skin solver. And based on the blend shapes that are being activated, they can figure out which part of the face is having a muscle trigger to contract or expand the facial performances. And it can run a realistic skin solver on top of that and give you all the secondary dynamics that you need for maybe a more believable performance. So fax shapes on its own can kind of feel a bit stiff, so you do want some kind of a tissue solve or something on top of it just to kind of mush things in together. And Adonis has some really nice tools, and all built into Maya. They also have some nodes that go into Houdini for their skin solver. But if you are primarily Maya-based, they have fantastic tooling for that. So the general theme of often with creatures is that it always helps to layer effects on top of the character's performance, just to make things feel a bit more believable. And this is something I did with Mengia's tool from earlier. So on the right side, I have this kind of wrinkle deformer working on top of just a kind of boring performance. Or like, let's say, a soft deformation performance coming right out of the rig. And I've got kind of 3 layers of wrinkling, so there's stuff on his forehead that's going to be bigger pieces of tissue that's going to clump up. Then I have things on his neck that's going to be thinner pieces of wrinkling. And then it's a bit hard to see, but I have some very tiny pore stretching that I've done around the eyelids and things like that. And it just it's really cool to see that even if you don't have a lot coming directly like out of your rig system, there's stuff that you can layer to kind of make things look a bit more interesting. Yeah. So the underlying thing for, of course, like a fact-based system is to have a rig system that's going to work primarily with fact shapes. So there's a lot of ways to build these rig systems. MetaHuman has its control board, which is their approach with it. I liked these like sculptable controls. So I like stuff that's just going to be directly on the geometry that I can move around and manipulate, and it's going to give me the results. There are some other systems which are just animation chart boards, which you might have seen with some game development and things like that, which can be very tedious to clean up. But I think this makes for a nice user-friendly experience because you have simple controls that are just attached to the face and you can kind of manipulate things around. And this rig system is primarily built based off of just blend shapes, and that's just what's creating all of the effects. And the cool thing about building a system like that is that when you want to transfer it over to multiple different characters, because it's just primarily fact shapes that's working on the underlying system, that transfer is really, really easy. So we're going to do a little demo in a little bit where I kind of showcase how to do that transfer. But that's that. And we'll, towards the end of this, kind of look at a little bit of machine learning for performance capture with Wonder Dynamics and Move One, and of course, MetaHuman Animator as well. You can see also the team with testing any facial performances to some strange expressions, but I think that's a requirement. Yes. So yeah. And this one, basically all 4 characters are using the same rig. They're using the same set of blend shapes, and we are able to transfer the performance between all the characters pretty easily. It's of course not perfect, so based on the character you kind of work on, you need to make some changes to kind of emphasize certain things or de-emphasize certain things, but in a moment I'm just going to show you how quick it is to actually transfer some of these systems. And that's the other thing, right? When you're in production, you want to make sure that all the stuff that you build is transferable to different characters, and you're not just building per project that you're building for the long term. Cool. Another demo. I want you all to cross your fingers now and hope nothing falls apart, okay? I need the good luck. Okay, so we have a character here. I am just gonna hide the primary joint system. Okay, so I have a little character. I have a performance that's going on over here. And like I said, I prefer to have controls that are sculptable. So it's something that's easy to work with. I understand. I kind of build a system so that I know the direction of the control is going to say there's going to be a smile, this is going to be a frown, and then please figure out all the stuff that's in between it. So I prefer to have a system like that. Underneath it, of course, is mostly just blend shapes that's going to be working. So we got a bunch of these shapes that are there. And the skinning is just for the primary joints to kind of deform the head. And like I said, because it's just blend shape data, when we use Wrap 3D and stuff like that to kind of transfer the character over onto a new character, because we want to keep the topology kind of the same, we can also transfer all the blend shapes and we get the benefit of all of that. So yeah, we got this little character right here, and I have 2 characters I can transfer. One is the ape, and then we also have the exomorph alien. So let's just do maybe the ape one, because I think that's a bit more fun. So if I duplicate my geometry, and I'm just going to hide the source. just going to give it a Lambert there. Because my character is based off the same UV and also the same point ID, what I should be able to do is pick my two characters, create a little blend shape, just gonna unlock the normals and transfer all that data over, and my control system still should work pretty well. Of course, there's going to be some places it's going to fall apart, so like a blink, you might have to go in there and clean up some of these shapes, but the amount you're getting just kind of from just doing a simple step like that is incredible. So if you, let's say, as a TD, like I would want to spend a lot of time kind of building sort of a default character where I make sure all the shapes look right, the rigging system looks right, spend a lot of time doing that for that one character, and then try to find a way to essentially transfer it onto every other character. That way you kind of have this compounding effect. Stuff that you figured out on projects 6 years ago can kind of work on stuff today, and that allows you to kind of create very cool characters. And oh, look, he's sweet now. He's got big eyes. So there's that. And the fingers crossed thing worked, by the way, so nothing fell apart. So thanks for that. So yeah, this is the benefit of doing sort of a blend shape-based FACS approach. Of course, this system is only using blend shapes. You can kind of add other rig elements to it and kind of mix it up. But as long as you're kind of following this like underlying FACS system, you can transfer it onto multiple different characters without having to kind of do everything from scratch. Cool. And the next bit we have is with Wonder Dynamics and Move One. So this was a small test that I did with Wonder Dynamics a while ago, where I found this sort of video on YouTube where there was an instructional thing on doing a takedown. And we could extrapolate all of this motion capture data just from a 2D video. So what's really awesome about that is, well, let's say in production, if you have a safe system to do this, it means that you can get animation from plate data very quickly. So when we're talking about the actor who was doing the monster performance, we don't have to necessarily always hand animate everything. We can get information a lot faster. But for all of you guys and for myself as like independent artists, what's great about this is that, like I said earlier, I'm not very good at animation, so I'm not going to be able to get really nice results. So if I want to test some of my characters out either in production or if it's for an independent project, I know I can just capture a 2D video and then extrapolate the motion capture data from it and use that as kind of as my first test base to see if things are working. So systems like that is really great. Of course, with the motion capture, it's not perfect. It's doing quite a good job of like depth, kind of figuring out where that back arm is, the stuff that the camera can't see, but there's still quite a bit of like collisions and things like that that still kind of affect the character. So this becomes kind of the base frame that you start with. But then you can transfer this information onto other tools to kind of clean it up. One of them is, of course, Cascadeur. And what Cascadeur does is it figures out ways to kind of help pose your character accurately. So they have sort of a really nice machine learning system that figures out how a character should move based on the posing. So you could essentially feed your motion capture data onto one of their systems and get a much more believable result. So if, let's say, the machine learned capture, 2D capture wasn't perfect, you can do this thing, you can use this tool, and also Ragdoll, which I'll show in a moment, to kind of clean up the missing bits. And that means that if you don't have access to high quality animators, or at least if you're too early in the project and you don't have access to an animator because they're busy on actual production work, this is a good way to kind of get things started and start testing your setups out. I love this example because it's just a handful of poses that they create, and then it can figure out all the stuff in between. That's super nice. This is Ragdoll, which we've used in production a lot. So Ragdoll basically helps you create a lot of secondary dynamics with characters. It can also be very fun. But let's say in the exercise that we saw earlier with the 2D motion capture, there was a lot of collisions and things like that. Ragdoll could actually help you fix some of these collisions and create some nice overlapping animation for your character work. So that's really nice, and it works inside of Maya with any kind of rig system. So you can throw most rig systems onto it, and it seems to behave pretty well. So yeah, there's a bunch of really interesting tools out there to kind of get you more interesting performances. I also have to say Houdini has some interesting stuff for Ragdoll as well. So they have some stuff worth looking at. Yeah, and you can kind of constrain which part of the character you want it to be dynamic and which part you want it to be kind of just following the rig system underneath it. And you can constantly change that as well. So it's a very powerful, flexible tool, Ragdoll. So yeah, both of these will help you achieve some cool stuff. And then we can just look at one last meta-human thing. So you have me with a beard as a source footage, and that's just me in my room trying some stuff. And it's pretty cool that they can create a fairly accurate version of me in 3D. And that is how my hairline is going, so that's a good spot as well. And then you can transfer all that stuff into your custom character, bring it back into Maya, add some of these tools that we spoke about today, and layer some of the effects, and then get a pretty believable performance for your character work. And yeah, so there's a lot of stuff we spoke about today, a lot of different tools, and try some of them out. Most of them are just easily accessible to you guys, and it would be amazing, like especially with some of the character work that I've been seeing in the student reel, to see some animations and cool effects on top of it to help maybe bring those characters to life. But yeah, that's about it from me.
All right. Hey, it's working. Cool. Thank you so much, Madhav. I think this, in case you're all new and you're unaware, this is our Q&A portion. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask a question. I see a hand over here. And then you can raise your hand, and I'll put you in my mental queue. And then you get to hold this super awesome, very cool cube that is meant to make it so we don't damage a microphone. Here you are.
When transferring the fax-based rig setup, how do you go about getting the controls to meet the new geometry, especially with like constraints setups and stuff?
So you kind of have to be a little bit clever with how you build the rig system. So well, we have the file open, right? So we can just try that. So of course I can move the controller itself because it's going to cause that issue. But the control system isn't directly linked to basically the fax blend shapes. So if I just do a Control G to group it, I can now move my controllers kind of wherever I want. And so if that works, then I can move from there, and then I can transfer stuff over. So there's some clever rigging you can do to kind of work around this stuff. Very often, if you do a rig system where you're doing parent constraints and things like that to control your character, you won't be able to do these things because there's always going to be this parent hierarchy that's going to transfer stuff over. But if you use direct connections and things like that, you can override the system and build really clever rigs. I started off working in cartoons, and in cartoons, you have so much more like deformation or deformer-based rigs that you build. So you end up having to build things in really interesting ways. And I have kind of a workshop that's going to come out soon explaining some of this stuff, so hopefully that'll help you understand. But there are ways to do it. So that's another thing, right? Because once you have this rig system, it's great you can transfer some of the performances and animation over, but you also want to be able to transfer the control system. And once you figure out how to do that, you can even take it up another level if the, let's say, the UVs and the points are all the same. In production, you can also just build an automated tool that will project the controls onto the new character in the right place just by looking at the difference in the blend shape and the new pose. And that makes things just like quickly updatable.
Am I next? Okay. Hi, my name's Megan.
Hi.
This is a really great talk. I had 2 questions. The first one, for big productions or just even small productions, how does the team or whoever is making the choices decide if you guys are going to do kinefx or build a whole skeleton, a real skeleton underneath muscles, underneath skin? Like how does that, because working with, animation and feature animation or even just school projects, we usually work with rigs that are just the character. There's nothing underneath. It's just one layer of geometry. So how do you decide if you're going to do a whole skeleton underneath?
So I would say this doesn't happen in all productions at Ghost, but for the most part, you kind of want to always start off with something that's realistic. So it doesn't so let's say you're making a bird tomorrow for a movie. There's a lot of bird anatomies that are out there. You could just download one of those, or if there's something available in-house, you can use that as a reference point and kind of start your base off with something that's accurate. And the really great thing about that is because if at any point production points certain things out in any department saying that, hey, that doesn't seem to move right, it's always good to have a realistic base to go to and say, no, we started off based on something that's realistic, something that's accurate. So if you're going to suggest something that needs to be changed, we kind of need to move away from that. So for the most part, at least in the start, we try to keep it as realistic as possible. But when it comes to actually using those bones in production, doing muscle sims and things like that, we have to kind of make a call on it and decide, when do we want to invest in this? This is going to be worthwhile. Money is a big factor. Time is a big factor. The thing with simulation is that things can break. There's, repetitions. It also means that once animation finishes, you have to update it every time. So unless you're using any of these machine learned systems, so that means that it's just expensive. So you have to kind of pick when you can do it. The clients that on their end, they always want the best stuff, right? So then you just have to internally decide what you want to invest in. There was this ad that we did for with these 2 sea lions for the Columbus Zoo. I think it was in the reel somewhere. And for that project, we wanted to have really nice deforming tissue, but we were kind of restricted based on time and budget and things like that, but we wanted to make it really believable. So we kind of did a nice fat and skin solve, but the internal anatomy, we kind of mostly rigged it. And that way we could work through that system much faster. So you can kind of do a 2.5 build or do an alternative system. So based on the production, based on the character, we'll just decide, okay, this is worthwhile. Let's invest in this one a little bit more here. And then with other things, we kind of might dial some stuff back and try to find alternative ways, with the goal always being that we want to create something that's going to be a star piece, right? So you never want to create something that's bad, so yeah.
Oh, it's off. Hello. Oh, sorry, my God. My second question was whenever you were showing a few of the animals, like the lion, and then even the man, like the scapula,
Yep.
there was a point in the workflow where there was segmented geometry on top of the bones.
Yeah.
What purpose does that part of the pipeline serve? Do you skin to those segmented geometry, or I guess if you're
Yeah, I mean, there's different reasons for doing it. So proxy geometries, which are those segmented geometries, they're really nice because they're fast to work with. And if you want to get something out to animation quickly and you don't have time to actually do the skinning and make sure everything is clean, a proxy version is really nice. The problem with creating anatomically accurate rigs is, so if you have, let's say, the scapula underneath the character deforming very realistically, you need to make sure that your skinned mesh, that's going to be what the animator sees, is also moving exactly the way the scapula is moving. Because if there's an offset in that, right, that whole system is going to go to a muscle sim, and then the animator is going to look at the pose post sim and say, that's not what I made, because now the character's kind of in a different place. So the segment geometry is like the version 1 that they get where we know the scapula and that piece is kind of exactly where it is. So when the animator's looking at the silhouette, they can kind of trust it and say that, okay, that's safe, that's good to go. But then eventually you kind of want to swap it out with a nice deforming tissue. So because in production as well, not every shot is going to get the muscle CFX full treatment. Some shots are just going to use the bind rig, and that's it, because maybe it's a fast moving shot and you don't see much. So you still need that underlying surface, everything to kind of make sense. So as it like goes through all these different shots, it's just going to be safe. So that segmented geometry is just in the beginning to kind of make sure the animators are working on something that is correct and accurate, you know. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. I have a question about research and development, especially when you're tasked with a creature that doesn't exist in nature. How much time does your team spend on research and development without spiraling or taking forever to figure out anatomy and that sort of thing?
Yeah, again, it's really dependent on the project, and sometimes we have a bit more time. Sometimes we don't. Like when we did the dinosaur that you saw in the beginning, like we had, I think, maybe over a month to actually develop that character, or maybe 2 months to develop that character. So we had a bunch of time to R&D, so we could have multiple departments come in, give out ideas, kind of leverage everyone's knowledge. But there's other times in production you just don't have that. So often what ends up happening is we kind of bring in the key artists involved in any project, and we kind of go through what are the most necessary things that we need to look at and get right, and then try and address that and kind of just get things going. Yeah, but that's kind of how things are everywhere. Like there will be projects where you will have a little bit more bandwidth, especially with like abstract effects, like or abstract creatures. Like you might need a bit more time to actually figure out what does the client want, what does the director want out of something. And sometimes, you know, the lack of R&D can bite you later, because you could build something that can never perform realistically, because some of the choices made at concept very early on is just something that's just not going to transfer over well. When it comes to, let's say, facial performance and things like that, my go-to is always that you need to have a really good actor as a reference, so we know that you're working off a base that's super realistic. Then whatever you do for the character design that you're building, right? So if it's an orc or whatever, blah, blah, you should still make sure that it's built off of something that's in reality, something that's relatable to the character, so you knock a second thing off and you're like, you know this is also kind of correct. So when it goes into all the steps going further on, everything, you know you're starting off from some place of accuracy, and that's more important in R&D. Like we make sure that we don't do anything that is just gonna bite us later, where we can't solve this issue now because we made a certain choice. And yeah, so that's kind of how it works.
If somebody were wanting to make a reel for a job in TFX, what would be the things that you would say are like absolutely necessary to have in the reel, or like that you would really want to see from that person that would make them like very hireable?
So at Ghost, we have a fairly generalist approach to production. So we like our artists to kind of know a few different things. So when it comes to CFX, I would say it's always muscle, hair, cloth, knowing a little bit of everything, trying some things out. Usually in production, when you're starting off, we don't expect you to know everything, because we're gonna make you guys use like in-house tools anyway, in-house setups. But what we want to see often is people's interests and how far you're willing to take your own self-development. So that's more important. So muscles, hair, cloth, that's fantastic. And for me personally, I am super into machine learning right now. So that's the thing I want to see more. I want to see people invest time and yeah, try to invest time in tech, the new tech that's coming out. And so yeah, that would be my say.
I have a couple of questions. So first of all, great talk, and I learned a lot, and I appreciate it. My question is, so you have to model skeletons as well as add the muscles too, and also, how do you like bind the skin to the muscles? Is it all like weight painting like you demonstrated, or is there anything more to that?
So weight painting is still the system that we use for our characters. But in terms of actually going in and doing the weight painting, a lot of times it's kind of automated now. So once you build it for one character, you just want to transfer that stuff over. So the only time you're actually going into kind of custom weight painting is when you want to make fixes, which is because the transfer either didn't work out really well, or you just want to do something unique on your character, right? But it's a really nice discipline to know, especially if you want to go into rigging. So I really for me, it's an artistic form, like weight painting, to kind of, especially in like game development and things like that, where you're limited with the amount of joints you can use. So how much can you get out of that? It's really important. So it is kind of an art of its own, but you don't do it as much these days in production because it's time consuming. So we usually kind of see if you can transfer certain things over to just speed things along. And then if you're kind of going with a physics-based solve in the end, maybe it's not as necessary. But with some of the tools like Adonis, which you were looking at, which is kind of building stuff inside of Maya, that actually brings some of the weight painting elements back, because you kind of want to go in and kind of paint in where the deformer is going to take effect. So it's not just in skinning, but it could be on other things that you're going to start, doing all of this stuff. And deformers are also a great way to layer information. So even if you're not painting stuff out for like a skin cluster, you can put it on a delta mush, or like if you're clever with your rigging, you can do a bunch of different things as well. So yeah.
I was also wondering about like skeletons. You have to like model the skeletons as well.
You mean in production or as, okay. So in production, there will be times like, so with the dinosaur, we had to kind of model the thing, and we had to build everything from scratch. But we've done a lot of creatures at this point, so we have a nice library so we can kind of work off of. So we often don't have to do things by hand anymore, so we can just like repurpose things. So the thing that one of the other students asked, which was that, yeah, when you do get something new, something abstract that you haven't seen before, then you kind of have to go in and kind of build some stuff. But most VFX houses, the speed of production is really fast, so you don't have so much time to actually go in and invest and kind of build the skeleton structure perfectly every time, so you kind of want to move along really quickly. But I really appreciate when animators and modelers come from a core of understanding anatomy really well, because that makes my life a lot easier, both in having sort of conversation when we're building our characters, but also in terms of just reliable stuff coming to you, so I don't have to double check anything, because yeah, you just know everyone's kind of gonna get things right. So anatomy is a great thing to study. I was just going through your library at the school earlier today. It was fantastic. There's so many books in there, so it's really great. So definitely know anatomy.
Awesome. So I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
If people want to stay up to date with you or contact you, or if they have other questions, where could they do all of that stuff?
Yeah, LinkedIn is easy. I have a little Instagram account as well. You can also reach out over there. Like I said, I collaborate with a lot of artists on independent work, so if you have any questions, if you want to try something out, if you're curious about any piece of tech, just reach out. It's fine. Also reach out to Ghost. There are also a lot of friendly artists there. And so yeah, we're very accessible. So
awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. Give it up one more time for Madhav.
Thank you.
And as he alluded to, the Gnomon Library is pretty great. So if you'd like to learn more about the Gnomon Library or our campus altogether, just schedule a tour to come on through. Check us out at gnomon.edu. If you're interested in what other events we're going to be throwing, check us out on all of our socials. You can also go to gnomon.edu for that. And until next time, we'll see you. Thank you all so much for being here.